It should have been the happiest night of my life. I had just crossed a finish line nobody thought I could reach. Then, right as dessert arrived, my father placed a thick stack of papers between us. He demanded I sign over my entire inheritance to my younger sister. I did not scream or cry. I looked him in the eye and said no. That was the exact moment our perfect family began to fall apart. My name is Bailey Evans, and for exactly 45 minutes, I allowed myself to believe that the dinner was actually about me. We were seated at the best table in the Sterling, a steakhouse downtown where the waiters wore white gloves and the menu did not list prices, around us. The room was a cacophony of celebration. Corks were popping, silverware was clinking against porcelain, and laughter erupted in bright, sharp bursts from the other tables. It was graduation season. I could spot at least 3 other families in the room with a son or daughter still wearing the sash or the cap, beaming with the relief of 4 hard years coming to an end. I had just graduated with honors. I had a degree that I had paid for myself, working double shifts at a coffee shop and taking loans that kept me awake at 3 in the morning. I was 28 years old, slightly older than the average graduate, but I had crossed the finish line. My father, Richard Evans, raised his wine glass. He was a man who wore his suits like armor, expensive and impenetrable. He looked around the room first to ensure that enough people were watching us before he turned his gaze to me. "To your success, Bailey," he said. His voice was a deep baritone that commanded attention. It was the voice he used in boardrooms. "To success," my mother, Linda, echoed. She offered a tight, practiced smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Her attention flickered almost immediately to my left. "Chloe, put your phone away. Darling, people are looking." Chloe Evans sat next to me, slouching in her chair with the casual elegance of someone who had never been told to sit up straight in her life. My younger sister was 24. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with the kind of glossy hair and perfect skin that came from expensive dermatologists and zero stress. She sighed, a long, dramatic exhalation, and dropped her phone onto the white tablecloth with a thud. "Sorry," Chloe said, picking up her fork and stabbing a piece of lobster. "I was just checking the time. Are we almost done? I promised Lexi I would meet her by 9. "It is your sister's big night," Linda said, though her tone lacked any real reprimand. "Be nice." I took a sip of water. The ice clinked against the glass. The cold liquid did nothing to settle the knot forming in my stomach. This was the dynamic. It had always been the dynamic. I was the achievement they bragged about to their friends to look like successful parents. And Chloe was the child they actually parented. I was the trophy on the shelf. She was the pet on the lap. For the main course, we ate in a silence that felt heavy and suffocating, contrasting sharply with the festive noise of the restaurant. I tried to make conversation. I talked about my final thesis. I mentioned the job interview I had lined up for next Tuesday. Richard nodded absently, checking his watch. Linda made humming noises of approval while cutting Chloe's steak into smaller pieces, a habit she had never dropped even though Chloe was a grown woman. Then came dessert. The waiter cleared the plates and brought out a tiered tray of pastries, but nobody reached for them. Richard wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and placed it deliberately on the table. He reached down to the leather briefcase he had kept by his feet all evening. I had assumed it contained a gift, perhaps a pen, maybe a card. I was not expecting much, but I was expecting something that acknowledged the day. Instead, he pulled out a thick blue folder. The plastic cover was cold and slick. He placed it in the center of the table, pushing aside the centerpiece of white lilies. The sound of the folder hitting the wood was dull and flat, but to me, it sounded like a gavel striking a block. "What is this?" I asked. I tried to keep my voice light, but my heart began to hammer against my ribs. "Just some housekeeping," Richard said. He opened the folder. Inside was a stack of legal documents, clipped together with a heavy metal binder clip. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and dense with text. At the bottom of the first page, a yellow sticky note with a bright pink arrow pointed to a signature line. "We need to get this sorted out before you start your new life," Linda said. Her voice took on a strange, sugary quality. It was the tone she used when she was trying to convince a store manager to accept an expired coupon. We thought tonight would be the perfect time, since we are all together. I looked down at the document. The text was upside down, but I had spent enough time reading contracts in my business law classes to recognize the structure. I reached out and spun the folder around. My eyes scanned the bold text at the top, deed of assignment and release of interest. I read the first paragraph, then the second. The air in the restaurant seemed to vanish. My lungs pumped, but I could not find any oxygen. The document detailed the transfer of the Evans family trust, specifically, the portion allocated to me by my grandfather, Walter Evans, to a sole beneficiary. That beneficiary was Chloe Evans. I looked up. My father was watching me with a look of expectancy, like a teacher waiting for a student to solve a simple math problem. My mother was smiling, her hands clasped under her chin. Chloe was back on her phone, thumb scrolling rapidly, completely uninterested in the fact that our parents were asking me to sign away my future. "I do not understand," I said. My voice sounded hollow. "This is Grandpa Walter's trust, the one he set up for me." "Technically, yes," Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. "But you have to look at the bigger picture. Bailey, you are the capable one. You have always been the capable one. Look at you. You just graduated. You have a job interview. You have drive." He said the word drive like it was a consolation prize. "Your sister," Linda interrupted, reaching across the table to touch my hand. Her skin was cold. "Your sister needs a little more help. She has such big dreams. Bailey, she wants to open that art gallery in the city. You know how expensive rent is. She needs capital." I pulled my hand away. "And my inheritance is that capital?" "It is not just about the gallery," Richard said, his voice hardening slightly. "It is about fairness. You have an education. I paid for my education. I cut in. I paid for every credit hour. I paid for my books. I paid for the bus fare to get to class." Richard's jaw tightened. He hated being corrected. "We provided you with the foundation. We gave you the ethics. The point is, Bailey, you are going to be fine. You are a survivor. Chloe is different. She is sensitive. She needs a safety net that you do not require. This money would be wasted on you because you would just save it. Chloe will use it to build something." I looked at Chloe. She had stopped scrolling and was now looking at me, a smirk playing on her lips. She knew. She had known before we even sat down. She was not bored. She was waiting for the show. "It is just a signature." "Bales," Chloe said, using a nickname I hated. "Don't be greedy. You are already the smart one. Let me be the rich one." She giggled, as if she had just made a clever joke. I looked back at the document. The sum involved was not small. It was enough to buy a house, enough to start a business. It was the only thing Grandfather Walter had been able to protect from Richard's controlling grip before he died. He had told me, specifically, that this was my freedom. And now, on the night I was celebrating my independence, they wanted me to sign my freedom over to the Golden Child. They did not ask me. This was not a request. Richard had brought the pen. He had uncapped it. He had laid it on the paper. The line was waiting. They had staged this in a public place, a crowded restaurant, banking on the fact that Bailey Evans, the good daughter, the quiet daughter, would never cause a scene. They counted on my shame. They weaponized their knowledge of my personality against me. Linda leaned in closer. Her perfume, expensive and cloying, filled my nose. "Just sign it. Sweetheart, do it for the family. We are a team, remember? Family supports family. If you do not sign, well, it would look very selfish. It would break your father's heart to see you acting so cold toward your sister." I stared at the paper. I saw the legal clauses that would strip me of everything Grandfather Walter intended for me. I saw the clause that stated I was doing this voluntarily and without duress. I looked at Richard. He was checking the wine list again, assuming the deal was done. I looked at Linda. She was already signaling for the waiter, probably to order more champagne to toast Chloe's new fortune. I looked at Chloe. She winked at me. A strange clarity washed over me. It was cold and sharp, like the ice water in my glass. For 28 years, I had tried to earn their approval. I had thought that if I was just smart enough, successful enough, quiet enough, they would finally look at me the way they looked at her. But they never would, to them. I was not a daughter, I was a resource. I was a spare part to be harvested when their favorite child needed an upgrade. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. Richard smiled. Good girl. I knew you would be reasonable. I held the pen for a second, feeling its weight. Then, I capped it with a loud, definitive click. I placed the pen down next to the folder. I did not push the folder back. I simply took my hands off the table and placed them in my lap. No, I said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the noise of our table instantly. Richard froze. His hand stopped halfway to his wineglass. Linda's smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching. Excuse me? Richard asked. His voice dropped an octave. It was a warning growl. I said no. I repeated. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. I will not sign this. I will not transfer my inheritance to Chloe. Chloe let out a sharp laugh of disbelief. Mom, she is joking, right? Tell her to stop joking. Linda's eyes darted around the room to see if anyone was watching. Bailey, lower your voice. You are being hysterical. You are tired from the ceremony. Just sign the paper and we can have dessert. I am not tired, I said, looking her directly in the eyes, and I am not hysterical. I am reading a contract that you tried to ambush me with at a graduation dinner, and I am rejecting it. Richard leaned across the table. His face was turning a mottled shade of red. You ungrateful little, do you have any idea what we have done for you? We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You owe us this. You owe your sister this. I owe her nothing, I said, and I certainly do not owe her $300,000 of grandfather's money. The number hung in the air. $300,000. It was the first time the amount had been spoken aloud. If you do not sign that paper, Richard hissed, leaning so close I could smell the scotch on his breath. You are walking away from this family. You are choosing money over your own blood. Do you understand me, Bailey? If you walk out of here without signing, you are on your own. No support, no contacts, nothing. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the anger. He needed this money for Chloe because he knew, deep down, that Chloe could not survive the real world, and he knew that I could. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Drawing the attention of the table next to us, a woman in a blue dress looked over. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. I picked up my purse. I think I have been on my own for a long time. Richard, I said. I did not call him Dad. I did not say goodbye. I did not look at Chloe, whose mouth was now hanging open in genuine shock. I turned my back on the table, on the folder, and on the 3 people who had shared my last name. I walked through the crowded restaurant, past the happy families and the toasts and the laughter. My legs felt shaky, but my head was high. I walked out the front door and into the cool night air of the city, leaving them sitting there with a pen that would never be used and a silence they had absolutely no idea how to fill. I sat in the driver's seat of my 12-year-old Honda Civic, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. The leather was cracked under my right thumb, a flaw I had covered with electrical tape 3 years ago because I could not afford to get it reupholstered. That car was the perfect metaphor for my entire existence within the Evans family. Functional, reliable, and completely held together by my own cheap, desperate fixes while everyone else looked away. Through the windshield, the neon sign of the Sterling buzzed with a pretentious golden hue. I watched a valet rush past to open the door of a brand new Mercedes for a couple leaving the restaurant. That was the world my parents lived in. That was the world Chloe lived in. I was just the mechanic they called when the engine made a funny noise, expected to fix the problem and then disappear back into the garage. I did not start the engine immediately. I needed the silence. The silence allowed the adrenaline to recede, and in its wake, The memories began to flood in, sharp and distinct. The ambush at the dinner table was not a sudden storm. It was the result of a climate that had been changing slowly, degree by degree, for 2 decades. I thought back to the summer before my freshman year of college. I had been accepted into a prestigious state university, a moment of immense pride that I had celebrated by myself with a cupcake from a convenience store. When I brought the tuition bill to my father, Richard had put on his reading glasses and sighed the long, suffering sigh of a martyr. "Money is tight right now, Bailey," he had said, not looking up from his laptop. "The market is volatile. We need you to take out loans. It builds character. You will appreciate the education more if you pay for it yourself." I had believed him. I was 18 and naive, and I wanted to be the good daughter who understood the family's financial burdens. I took out the maximum amount of student loans. I applied for a work-study program shelving books in the campus library until midnight. I ate instant noodles so often that the smell of sodium still made me nauseous. 3 months into my first semester, I saw the photos on social media. Chloe, who was a junior in high school at the time, had posted a picture of her new convertible. It was a sweet 16 gift. The caption read, "Daddy loves me the most." I remembered calling home, my voice trembling, asking how they could afford a $40,000 car when they could not help me with a $500 textbook fee. My mother, Linda, had answered. Her voice was light, dismissive. "Oh, Bailey, do not be jealous. Chloe needs a safe car to get to dance practice. You are so resourceful. You always figure it out. We do not worry about you." That was the sentence that defined my life. "We do not worry about you." It sounded like a compliment, but it was a curse. Because I was competent, I became invisible. Because I did not scream, I was assumed to be fine. Because I never asked for help, they assumed I did not need it. They did not hate me. That would have been easier to process. Hate implies passion. Hate implies that I occupied space in their minds. Instead, I was simply part of the background scenery, like a reliable lamp or a sturdy coat rack. Chloe, on the other hand, was a fragile vase that needed to be carried with 2 hands. If she got a C in math, they hired a private tutor. If I got an A in calculus, they nodded and asked if I had remembered to take the trash out. If Chloe crashed her car, they bought her a safer one. If I got a flat tire, they told me to call roadside assistance and pay for it myself. They called it fairness. They said they were giving each of us what we needed. They gave Chloe the world because they believed she could not survive without it. They gave me nothing because they knew I would survive anyway. But there was one person who saw the disparity. One person who looked at the family portrait and saw the cracks in the frame. Walter Evans. My grandfather was a man made of granite and cigar smoke. He did not smile often, and he had no patience for the performative niceties that my parents cherished. He built his wealth through commercial real estate and logistics, industries where a handshake meant something, but a contract meant everything. When I was 22, just after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I spent the summer helping him organize his home office. His health was beginning to fail. Not that he would admit it, but he could no longer manage the mountain of paperwork his assets generated. I remembered the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light of his study. The room smelled of old leather and mints. He sat in his heavy oak chair, watching me sort through deeds, titles, and stock certificates. "Bailey," he had said, his voice raspy, "bring me the file on the warehouse in the South District." I handed it to him. He opened it, scanned the first page, and then slammed it shut. "Tell me what you see," he demanded. I looked at the folder. "It is the deed, Grandpa." "No," he barked, though his eyes were kind. "Look closer. Look at the date. Look at the signature witness." I opened the file again. I studied the document. The witness signature was dated 3 days after the notarization stamp. "It is invalid," I whispered. "Technically, the witness was not present at the signing." Walter nodded, a rare grin breaking through his stoic expression. "Exactly. In this world, people will tell you they love you. They will tell you they have your best interests at heart, They will smile and pour you wine. But the paper, Bailey, the paper does not lie. The paper has a memory that people do not. That summer became my real education. Walter did not just teach me how to file. He taught me how to read. He taught me that the bold print gives, but the fine print takes away. He showed me how to structure a trust so that it could not be dissolved by a greedy relative. He explained the difference between a revocable and an irrevocable beneficiary. He saw something in me that my parents never did. They saw a workhorse. He saw a successor. You have a mind for order. He told me once as we were organizing his tax returns, your father, Richard is a spender. He likes the appearance of wealth, but he hates the mechanics of it. He thinks money is magic. You understand that money is just arithmetic and law. One rainy afternoon, a few months before he passed, he called me to his desk. He looked frail, his skin like parchment paper, but his eyes were sharp. I am changing my will, he said. I froze. I did not want to talk about him dying. Listen to me, he commanded. I am leaving the bulk of the estate to your father because if I do not, he will spend the rest of his life suing the estate and wasting every penny on lawyers. He has an ego that cannot handle being cut out. I nodded, feeling a familiar pang of resignation. Of course, Richard wins again. But, Walter continued, raising a finger, I am carving out a piece, a significant piece, and I am locking it down in a separate trust. It is for you, Bailey. He pulled out a draft document. It was the early version of the papers Richard had slapped onto the table at the restaurant tonight. I want you to have this, Walter said, not because you are my granddaughter, but because you are the only one who will not blow it on vacations and depreciating assets. I am skipping your mother. I am skipping Chloe. This is yours. He leaned forward, gripping my hand with surprising strength. You have spent your whole life waiting for them to give you permission to be worthy. Bailey, I see it. You get good grades hoping they will notice. You work 2 jobs hoping they will respect you. Stop it. You do not need anyone's permission to be worthy. Competence is its own currency. I squeezed his hand back, fighting tears. Promise me something, he said. Promise me you will read everything before you sign it, even if it is from me, even if it is from your parents, especially if it is from your parents. I promise, I had whispered. Walter died 4 months later. The funeral was a grand affair, exactly the kind he would have hated. Richard gave a eulogy that was mostly about himself. Chloe cried dramatically into a lace handkerchief, even though she had not visited Walter in the hospital once. Linda spent the reception worrying about whether the caterers had brought enough shrimp. I stood at the back, dry-eyed, holding the knowledge of what was in those files like a shield. Sitting in my car now, the memory of his voice was the only thing steadying my breathing. The scene in the restaurant finally made sense. It was not just greed, it was panic. Richard and Linda had likely burned through the liquid cash Walter had left them. They lived a lifestyle that required constant fuel, country club memberships, leased luxury SUVs, Chloe's endless hobbies that she picked up and dropped within weeks. They had probably assumed that because I was the good daughter, the one who never asked for anything, I would be easy to roll over. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They thought I was compliant because I was polite. They did not realize that while they were busy posing for pictures and buying affection, I was in the library with Walter, learning how to sharpen a blade made of paper and ink. I looked down at my hands. They were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I had spent 28 years trying to buy a seat at their table with my obedience. Tonight, I realized that the price was too high, and the food was rotten anyway. I put the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered once, then roared to life with a rattle that shook the dashboard. It was not a Mercedes, but it was mine. I was not going back to my apartment. They had a spare key. I had given it to them 2 years ago for emergencies. Another foolish act of trust. If they were desperate enough to ambush me at graduation, they were desperate enough to be waiting at my door. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the Sterling in my rearview mirror. I merged onto the highway, heading toward the only place I knew I would be safe, the one place where logic ruled over emotion. I needed to make a call, but not to them. I needed to call Aunt Nora. She was Walter's younger sister, the black sheep of the family who had moved 2 towns over to live with her cats and her expansive collection of mystery novels. She was the only other person Walter had trusted. As I drove, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red. I was done being the victim. I was done being the resource. They wanted a legal battle? They wanted to talk about inheritance and rights? Fine. I reached for my phone and dialed. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello? A groggy voice answered. Aunt Nora, I said, my voice clear and strong. It is Bailey. Do not hang up. I need you to find the number for Mr. Keaton. Who? Mr. Keaton, I repeated. Grandpa Walter's lawyer, the one who drafted the trust. Bailey? What time is it? What is going on? They tried to make me sign it away. Nora, Mom and Dad, tonight. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then, the rustle of sheets and the click of a lamp turning on. Did you sign it? Nora asked, her voice suddenly sharp, sounding exactly like Walter. No, I said. Good girl, she breathed. Come over. I will put the kettle on. I hung up and pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The Honda rattled, but it moved forward, carrying me away from the family I was born into and toward the future I was about to fight for. I was not just Bailey Evans, the overlooked daughter, anymore. I was Walter Evans's student, and the final exam had just begun. The silence that followed my refusal was not empty. It was heavy and pressurized, like the air in a submarine seconds before the hull breaches. The clinking of silverware at the surrounding tables seemed to amplify, becoming a deafening backdrop to the war that had just been declared at table 14. Chloe was the first to break the tension. She did not look at me. Instead, she turned her head toward the other end of our long table where my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Bob were sitting, oblivious to the hostage situation happening near the centerpiece. Oh my God, Chloe said, her voice pitched loud enough to carry across the grilled salmon. Can you believe this? She is actually trying to keep the money. It is honestly so embarrassing. She knows she does not need it, but she just wants to punish me. She let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head so her earrings caught the light. It was a performance. She was inviting an audience to witness my greed. I could feel the eyes of my extended family shifting toward me, confused and judgmental. To them, without context, I was simply the obstinate sister ruining a graduation dinner. Richard did not look at the relatives. His eyes were locked on me, and the mask of the benevolent patriarch had completely dissolved. The vein in his temple, usually invisible, was throbbing in a way that signaled dangerous blood pressure. He leaned forward, his chest pressing against the table edge, invading my personal space. This is not a negotiation. Bailey, he said, his voice was a low rumble, stripped of all warmth. This is about honor. This family has a reputation in this city. We support each other. If you hoard this money, you are spitting on everything we have built. You are telling the world that you do not care if your sister fails. Is that who you are? A saboteur? Linda chimed in, her voice trembling with a weaponized fragility. She reached for her napkin and dabbed at dry eyes. Why do you have to ruin this? She whispered harshly. This was supposed to be a happy day. We are all dressed up. We are celebrating you. And you choose this moment to be difficult? You are making a scene. Bailey, you are embarrassing your father. I looked at them. I looked at the 3 people who were supposed to be my safe harbor and saw only predators circling a wounded animal, but they had miscalculated. I was not wounded. I was educated. I reached out and pulled the blue folder back toward me. Richard's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second, thinking I was capitulating, that his intimidation had worked. Instead, I flipped the document to the last page, past the signature line, to the section where the legal disclaimer should be. I scanned the bottom margin. It was blank. No stamp, no firm name, no notary seal placeholder. I looked up, meeting Richard's gaze with a calmness that I knew infuriated him. Who is the lawyer? I asked. Richard blinked, the rhythm of his anger disrupted. What? I tapped the paper with my index finger. This document, it attempts to bypass a trust structure that Grandfather Walter spent 40 years perfecting. To do that legally, you would need a specialist in estate law to draft a waiver of interest. So, I will ask you again, who is the lawyer that drafted this? Richard stiffened. He took a sip of his wine, stalling. It was our family attorney. He said, "You know him." Which one? I pressed, not letting him breathe. Was it Mr. Henderson? Because I know for a fact Henderson retired to Florida 2 years ago. Was it the firm on 4th Street? Because if it was a legitimate firm, their name would be watermarked on the stationery. This is printed on standard office supply paper. Richard. I leaned in, matching his intensity. Did you write this? I asked softly. Did you download a template off the internet and fill in the blanks, hoping I would be too stupid or too scared to notice? The color drained from Linda's face. She looked at Richard, waiting for him to refute me, but he remained silent, his jaw working side to side. That silence was my answer. There was no lawyer, there was no legal standing. It was a bluff, a $300,000 bluff. That was when I saw the flash. I turned my head. Chloe was holding her phone up. The camera lens pointed directly at my face. On the screen, I could see the red recording indicator pulsing. Say that again, Chloe sneered. Tell everyone how you are stealing my future. I am going to post this. I want everyone to see what a greedy, jealous witch you really are. You are going to go viral. Bailey, by tomorrow morning, everyone will know you stole from your own baby sister. It was a modern ambush. She was trying to try me in the court of public opinion because she knew she would lose in a court of law. She wanted to blackmail me with social shame. I looked at the lens. I saw my own reflection in the glass. Calm and composed. I did not swat the phone away. I did not shout. I did not give her the reaction she needed to edit into a villain arc. Instead, I stood up. I did it slowly, deliberately. I picked up my linen napkin, folded it into a neat square, and placed it gently beside my untouched dessert plate. The motion was so precise that it drew Richard's eyes away from Chloe's phone. I am done, I said. I did not mean I was done with dinner. I meant I was done with the charade. I was done with the role of the sacrificial lamb. Sit down, Richard commanded, his voice rising, drawing looks from the neighboring tables. You do not walk away from me. I looked down at him. From my standing position, he looked smaller, older, desperate. I just did, I said. I turned on my heel. I could hear Chloe scoffing behind me, narrating to her camera. Look at her running away. She cannot even face me. Her voice was shrill, desperate for content, but it faded as I walked through the dining room. I moved past the waiters carrying trays of steak and lobster, past the maitre d' who smiled obliviously, and pushed through the heavy oak doors. The night air hit me like a physical blow, cooling the heat that had risen in my cheeks. My hands, which I had kept perfectly still at the table, began to tremble uncontrollably. It was the adrenaline crash. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. The silence inside the Honda was absolute. I took a deep breath, counting to 10, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I was safe physically, but I knew the war had just escalated. They would not stop. Richard would come for me with legal threats. Chloe would come for me on social media. Linda would mobilize the relatives. I needed allies, and I had exactly one. I pulled my phone out of my purse. My fingers felt clumsy as I navigated to the contacts. I pressed the call button for Aunt Nora. The ringing tone sounded in the car speakers. 1 ring, 2 rings. Hello? Her voice was groggy, confused. Aunt Nora, I said. My voice cracked, betraying the calm I had held on to inside the restaurant. Bailey, is everything okay? I am coming over, I said. I cannot go back to my apartment. They ambushed me. Nora, they tried to make me sign away Grandpa's trust. There was a pause, and then the sound of movement on the other end. Did you sign? Nora asked. No. I asked for the lawyer's name, and they froze. I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by a low chuckle. That is Walter's girl. I am driving to your house now, I said, starting the engine. I need to talk to Mr. Keaton. I need to know exactly what Grandpa left me, and I need to know how to protect it, because they are not going to let this go. Come straight here, Nora said, her voice shifting from sleepy to steely. I will unlock the back gate. And Bailey? Yes? Drive carefully. You are worth more than they are. But tonight, you are also worth a lot of money to people who are desperate. Watch your mirrors. I hung up. I checked the rearview mirror. The entrance to the restaurant was empty, but I knew it would not stay that way for long. I shifted the car into gear and pulled out onto the road, the city lights blurring into long streaks of color as I accelerated toward the only sanctuary I had left. The dinner was over. The litigation was about to begin. The next 72 hours were not defined by noise, but by the aggressive, weaponized silence I maintained while my phone screamed on the nightstand. I stayed in Aunt Nora's guest room, a space that smelled of lavender and old paperbacks. I did not turn my phone off. That would have been avoidance. Instead, I placed it face up on the wooden dresser and treated it like a piece of evidence in an active crime scene. The first wave of notifications began before I had even pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, but they reached a fever pitch by the next morning. Richard was the first to text. His messages were short, punctuated by the arrogance of a man who had never been told no. Pick up the phone. Bailey, we need to resolve this tonight. You are blowing this out of proportion. If you do not call me by 10 in the morning, I am cutting off your car insurance. I read the text about the insurance and almost laughed. My car insurance was under my own name. I had switched it over 3 years ago when I realized Richard used administrative oversight as a way to control my movements. He did not even know he wasn't paying for it anymore. That was how little attention he paid to the details of my life. Then came Linda. Her approach was the emotional shrapnel. Your father is sitting in the dark. He is heartbroken. I hope you are happy. Chloe is crying in her room. She says you hate her. Tell me that isn't true. Bailey, we are a family. I made your favorite lasagna. Just come home and we can sign the papers and forget this ugly night ever happened. And finally, Chloe. Her messages were a volatile mix of teenage angst and genuine malice. You're such a bitch. I posted the video. Enjoy being famous. Mom says you're just jealous because Dad loves me more. Everyone knows it. I did not reply to a single message. I did not type out a defense. I did not engage. Walter had taught me the most important rule of engagement when dealing with hostile parties. Anything you say can be used to frame the narrative. Silence, however, was a blank canvas. They could not twist words I did not speak. Instead of replying, I took screenshots. I captured every threat, every guilt trip, and every timestamp. I organized them into folders on my laptop labeled by sender. I backed them up to the cloud. I printed hard copies on Aunt Nora's ancient laser printer. By the second day, the tone of the messages shifted. The anger turned into paranoia. Where are you? Richard texted. I called your apartment manager. He says you aren't there. Are you with a boy? Is someone putting ideas in your head? Linda asked. They were realizing that their control panel was disconnected. They were pushing buttons, but the machine, me, was not responding. On the morning of the third day, Aunt Nora walked into the kitchen while I was drinking black coffee. She was wearing a floral robe and holding a heavy manila envelope. She placed it on the table between us. You look like hell, she said affectionately, pouring herself a cup. I feel like a fugitive, I admitted. Nora tapped the envelope. You are not a fugitive. Bailey, you are the plaintiff. You just do not know it yet. I looked at the envelope. It was sealed with wax, an old-fashioned touch that screamed Walter Evans. What is this? Your grandfather gave me this 2 weeks before he died. Nora said. He told me that there might come a day when Richard would try to bypass the trust. He said Richard would get desperate, probably when the market dipped or Chloe wanted something big. He told me to wait. Wait for what? Wait until they cornered you, Nora said, her eyes serious. Walter said that if they treated you with respect, this envelope should stay sealed. But if they tried to force your hand, if they tried to bully you, then I was to give you this. I reached out and broke the seal. Inside was a single business card and a letter written in Walter's cramped, spidery handwriting. The card read, Theodore Keaton, Senior Partner, Keaton and Associates. There was a private cell phone number handwritten on the back. I read the letter. It was short. Bailey. If you are reading this, your father has forgotten that money is a tool, not a weapon. He has likely tried to make you sign something you did not write. Do not sign it. Call Ted Keaton. Tell him the code phrase. The eagle has landed in the nest. He knows what to do. P.S. I knew you would be strong enough to say no. That is why I chose you. I felt a lump form in my throat, hot and painful. Walter had not just left me money. He had left me a strategy. He had played a chess game against my parents from beyond the grave, and he had set me up to deliver the checkmate. I picked up my phone. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. I did not care. I opened my email app. I did not use the code phrase. I felt it was too dramatic for a digital message, and I wanted a paper trail. I typed Theodore Keaton's email address from the card. Subject: Urgent, Bailey Evans, Walter Evans, Trust. Body: They just forced me to sign a transfer. I hit send. I expected to wait. Lawyers like Keaton usually had gatekeepers, secretaries, and paralegals who filtered out the noise. I expected a generic auto-reply telling me to call during business hours. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I did not recognize. I answered, "This is Bailey." "Ms. Evans," a voice said. It was deep, gravelly, and sharp as a razor. "This is Ted Keaton." I sat up straighter. "Mr. Keaton, I did not expect—" Walter told me to expect this call. Keaton interrupted. He sounded like he was already moving. Papers shuffling in the background. "I am sorry we have to meet under these circumstances, but I'm not surprised. Richard Evans has the financial discipline of a gambler in Vegas. He tried to make me sign a waiver. I said, at dinner, a deed of assignment." "Did you sign it?" Keaton asked. The question was quick, anxious. "No." "Good." Keaton exhaled. "That is very good. Now, listen to me carefully. Bailey, the trust has a specific clause. It is a protective mechanism. By attempting to coerce you, your parents may have triggered a violation of the trust's standing orders, but we need to prove the coercion. I have texts," I said, "hundreds of them, emails, and my sister. She recorded a video of the argument. She posted it online." Keaton actually laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "She posted evidence of her own extortion attempts? That is incredibly helpful of her. Download that video immediately before she realizes her mistake and deletes it." "I already have," I said. "Excellent." Keaton's voice shifted, becoming formal. "I am calling a meeting. Mandatory attendance for all parties named in the Walter Evans estate. That includes you, your parents, and your sister." "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning at 9. My office. I will send the summons to your father. He will try to call you. Do not answer. Do not speak to them. If they show up at your current location, you are at Nora's, correct?" "Yes." "If they show up there, call the police. Do not open the door. You are no longer their daughter in this matter. Ms. Evans, you are the primary beneficiary of a multi-million-dollar asset, and they are hostile actors attempting to defraud you. You need to start thinking like a CEO, not a child." I hung up the phone and looked at Aunt Nora. "He is calling a meeting," I said. Nora smiled and took a sip of her coffee. "Then you better get ready. You have 24 hours to build your case." I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state of preparation. I felt like a soldier cleaning her rifle before a battle. I printed the text logs. I highlighted the threats. "If you do not sign, I will cut you off. You owe us." I found the video Chloe had posted. It had garnered 3,000 views. The comments were a mixed bag. Some of her friends were supporting her, calling me selfish, but strangers, people who had no skin in the game, were pointing out the obvious. Wait, she's mad because her sister won't give her money? One comment read, "Why are the parents pressuring her at a restaurant? That's super toxic." Read another. I saved the video file. Then I saved the comment thread. By evening, the summons must have landed in Richard's inbox. My phone, which had been buzzing steadily for 2 days, suddenly went dead silent. No more texts, no more threats, no more guilt trips. The silence was far more terrifying than the noise. It meant they were talking to someone. It meant they realized this was no longer a family squabble that could be solved by bullying me into submission over dessert. They had brought a knife to a gunfight, and they had just heard the safety click off on my weapon. I barely slept that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of Aunt Nora's guest room, rehearsing what I would say. I replayed the dinner over and over in my head, the look on Richard's face, the way Linda had touched my hand, her skin cold, her affection conditional. I realized then that I was grieving. I was not grieving the loss of the money. I had never had it to begin with. I was grieving the death of hope, the hope that one day, if I was good enough, they would love me for me. That hope was gone. It had died the moment Richard put that blue folder on the table. Now there was only the law. At 8 in the morning, I dressed in my best suit, a charcoal gray blazer and trousers I had bought for job interviews. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun. I applied my makeup sparingly. I did not want to look like a girl. I wanted to look like a fortress. Nora drove me to the city. We did not talk much. The radio played soft jazz, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my stomach. We pulled up to a glass skyscraper in the financial district. Keaton and Associates occupied the top 3 floors. This was the big leagues. This was where corporations merged and empires were divided. I walked into the lobby, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I checked in at the front desk. "Bailey Evans to see Theodore Keaton," I said. The receptionist looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "Ah, yes. Mr. Keaton is expecting you. Conference room A. Your other party is already there." My stomach dropped. They were early. I rode the elevator up 40 floors. My ears popped. The doors slid open, revealing a reception area that cost more than my entire college education. I walked down the hallway toward the double glass doors of conference room A. I could see them through the glass. Richard was pacing, his face a mask of agitation. Linda was sitting at the long mahogany table, clutching her purse like a shield. Chloe was slumped in a chair, looking bored and annoyed, chewing gum. They looked up as I approached the door. Richard stopped pacing. His eyes locked onto mine. For a second, I felt the old reflex, the urge to look down, to apologize, to make myself small so he wouldn't be angry. Then I felt the weight of the file in my hand, the evidence, Walter's letter. I took a breath. I squared my shoulders. I reached out and pushed the heavy glass door open. I did not say hello. I walked to the opposite end of the table, as far away from them as possible, and set my file down. "Where have you been?" Richard barked. Though his voice lacked its usual thunder, it sounded thin in the acoustic perfection of the room. "We have been worried sick." I ignored him. I pulled out my chair and sat down. "Mr. Keaton will be with us shortly," I said. My voice was cool, detached. "Until then, I suggest you save your breath. You are going to need it." Richard opened his mouth to scream, but the door behind me opened. Theodore Keaton walked in. He was a small man, bald, wearing a suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, but his presence filled the room instantly. He carried no files. He needed no props. He looked at Richard. He looked at Linda. He looked at Chloe. And then he looked at me and nodded. "Good morning, everyone," Keaton said, his voice dry as dust. "Let us begin the reading of the actual will of Walter Evans." The trap was set, and they were all sitting right inside it. During the 48 hours I spent barricaded in Aunt Nora's house, I did not just hide, I worked. If my father wanted to treat our family dynamic like a business transaction, I was going to conduct due diligence that would make a forensic accountant blush. The first crack in their story arrived in my inbox at 2 in the morning on the first night. "Richard, assuming his intimidation tactics at the restaurant had simply rattled me rather than resolved me. Sent a follow-up email. The subject line was innocuous. The document you forgot? Attached was a PDF of the deed of assignment. Bailey. The email read, I am attaching the file. Print it, sign it, and bring it to the house tomorrow. We can put this unpleasantness behind us. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. I opened the PDF, this time, without the pressure of a public restaurant and my mother's weeping. I could look at the details. My eyes went straight to the notary section on the final page. It had been pre-stamped. The stamp bore the name Jameson T. Clark, Licensed Notary Public, State of Ohio, with a commission expiration date of next year. I opened a new tab on my laptop and navigated to the Ohio Secretary of State's searchable database. I typed in the name. No results found. I tried searching by the commission number listed on the stamp. The result popped up immediately, but it was not for a Jameson T. Clark. It belonged to a woman named Patricia Lewis, whose commission had expired 4 years ago. I sat back in the creaky wooden chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark room. My father had not just downloaded a template, he had forged a legal instrument. He had likely ordered a custom rubber stamp online with a fake name to make the document look official enough to fool his 28-year-old daughter. It was sloppy, it was desperate, and it was illegal. I took a screenshot of the database search results and saved it to a folder I named The Lie. The next morning, while sipping coffee that tasted like battery acid, I turned my attention to Chloe. My sister lived her entire life online. If she had a thought, she tweeted it. If she ate a bagel, she Instagrammed it. I knew that if she was expecting a payout of $300,000, she had already spent it in her head. I scrolled through her timeline. It was mostly reposts of the video she had taken of me at the restaurant, captioned with sob stories about how I was ruining her dreams. But I went back further. I looked at her posts from the week prior to graduation. There it was. 3 days before our dinner, Chloe had posted a photo of a set of keys resting on a concrete floor. The location was tagged, the Loft District, downtown. The caption read, Manifesting big things, deposit paid. My empire starts here. I zoomed in on the photo. In the corner, barely visible, was a leasing agreement lying on the floor. The paper was blurry, but the letterhead was distinct. Metro City Commercial Real Estate. I called Metro City pretending to be a personal assistant verifying an invoice. The receptionist was chatty. Yes, she confirmed. Chloe Evans had put down a non-refundable deposit of $5,000 on a studio space. The remaining balance of $25,000 for the first year's lease was due on Monday. 2 days after graduation. The timeline clicked into place like a deadbolt. Chloe had not just asked for the money, she had legally committed to spending it before she even had it. My parents knew. That was why the dinner had to happen. That was why the pressure was so intense. They needed my signature to cover a check Chloe had already written. I printed the screenshot of the post and wrote down the time of my call with the leasing office. By noon on the second day, Richard's strategy shifted from paternal disappointment to legal bullying. An email arrived with the subject line, Notice of Intent. Bailey, he wrote, I have consulted with counsel. Your refusal to sign constitutes a breach of verbal contract. We have witnesses who can testify that you agreed to support your sister. If you do not comply, we will sue you for emotional distress and elder abuse for the stress you are causing your mother. I read the email twice. Elder abuse. He was 58 years old and played golf 3 times a week. The audacity was breathtaking, but the phrasing breach of verbal contract told me everything I needed to know. He was grasping at straws. He knew the written document was fake, so now he was trying to claim I had promised the money verbally. I forwarded the email to Mr. Keaton without a word of commentary. Later that afternoon, Aunt Nora came into the room with a plate of sandwiches. She set it down and watched me organize my evidence. You know, she said softly, looking at the photo of Richard on my screen, this is not the first time he has tried to get creative with Walter's money. I looked up. What do you mean? Nora sat on the edge of the bed, about 6 months before Walter died. Your father came over to help him fix a leaky faucet. I was in the garden, but the window was open. I heard Richard asking Walter about the trust. He asked if there was a way to make the beneficiary designation flexible. Flexible? I repeated. Yes, he asked if he, as the executor of the main estate, could override the specific allocations if the family had an emergency. What did Grandpa say? Nora smiled grimly. He told Richard that the only emergency that would require unlocking that trust was if you were kidnapped and held for ransom. Otherwise, the money was locked in a vault that Richard did not have the combination to. She paused, smoothing her skirt. Richard got very quiet after that. I think that is when he started planning how to trick you into opening the vault yourself. I added Nora's testimony to my notes. It established a pattern of intent. This was not a sudden decision. It was a long con. As the sun went down on the final day before the meeting, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I did not recognize. It was not Richard, and it was not Chloe. You need to stop digging. You do not know who you are messing with. Sign the paper or things will get ugly. I stared at the screen. The message was vague. The kind of thing someone sends when they have watched too many mob movies. It was cowardly. I did not reply. I did not ask who it was. I took a screenshot. Then, I used a reverse lookup tool I had used for vetting vendors in my business classes. The number was a burner, registered to a prepaid application, untraceable to a specific person, but the timing was undeniable. I added it to the file. By the time I walked into the conference room the next morning, I was not just angry, I was armed. I had the fake notary stamp. I had the lease agreement proving premeditation. I had the threat of a frivolous lawsuit. I had the witness testimony of prior intent. And I had the anonymous threat. I sat in that expensive leather chair, watching my family squirm, and I felt a strange sense of calm. They thought they were walking into a negotiation. They thought they could talk over me, cry a little, and wear me down. They had no idea that I had spent the last 48 hours building a cage around them, and I was holding the only key. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and expensive cologne, a scent that barely masked the metallic tang of anxiety radiating from the other side of the table. I had arrived 15 minutes early, securing the seat at the far end of the long mahogany table. It was a strategic choice. From here, I could see the door, the window, and every micro-expression that crossed my family's faces. On the table in front of me sat my thick manila folder. I had not opened it yet. I simply rested my hand on top of it, a silent signal that I was not here to listen. I was here to present. Richard sat opposite me, flanked by Linda and Chloe. He was wearing his Navy power suit, the one he saved for shareholder meetings and country club disputes. He tapped a gold pen against the table, a rhythmic, irritating sound that betrayed his composure. "Mr. Keaton," Richard said as the lawyer settled into his chair, "I think we can make this very brief. My daughter, Bailey, was confused about the arrangement regarding her grandfather's estate. We are simply here to clarify the family's restructuring plan so that the funds can be released to the appropriate party. That being Chloe." He smiled a tight, confident smile, the kind that usually worked on waiters and junior employees. Linda nodded vigorously, her hands clasped in front of her. "Yes, exactly. We just want to clear up the misunderstanding so we can all go to lunch." Chloe did not look at me. She was examining her fingernails, looking bored. I assumed she was mentally decorating the studio she had already put a deposit on. Theodore Keaton did not smile. He placed a single, leather-bound document on the table and adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at Richard with the sort of detached interest a biologist might show a specimen in a jar. "Mr. Evans," Keaton said, his voice smooth and cold, "let me correct you on a fundamental point of order. We are not here to discuss a family restructuring plan. We are here to execute the legal will and testament of my client, the late Walter Evans, and regarding the funds you mentioned, there is no ambiguity to clarify." Richard's tapping stopped. "What do you mean?" "We have an agreement." Bailey agreed verbally. I did not. I interrupted. My voice was low, but it cut through the room. Richard glared at me. You did. At dinner. Before you stormed out like a child. Mr. Evans, Keaton said sharply, you are not a beneficiary of the specific trust we are discussing today. In fact, you have no legal standing in this room other than as an invited guest of the estate. If you interrupt again, I will have security escort you to the lobby. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was not used to being spoken to like an employee. Keaton opened the leather binder. The sound of the heavy paper turning was the only noise in the room. He began to read. I, Walter Evans, being of sound mind and body, do hereby establish the Evans Grandchild Trust. This trust is an irrevocable entity, separate from the primary estate. Keaton looked up over his glasses, making eye contact with Chloe, who had finally looked up from her nails. The sole beneficiary of this trust, entitled to 100% of the principal and accrued interest, is Bailey Marie Evans. The words hung in the air like smoke. Chloe blinked. Wait, what about me? Keaton ignored her. He continued reading. This trust is to be transferred to Bailey Evans upon the completion of her university degree. The funds are for her sole use and discretion. No other family member, including parents or siblings, shall have access to, control over, or benefit from these funds without the express, written consent of Bailey Evans. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Walter told me he was leaving it to the girls. Plural. He said he wanted them to share it. This is a mistake. You have the wrong draft. I do not make mistakes, Mr. Evans, Keaton said calmly, and neither did your father. He was quite specific. He anticipated that you might attempt to claim otherwise. Keaton turned a page. Furthermore, the trust stipulates that any attempt to coerce, manipulate, or force the beneficiary to alter the distribution of these funds will be considered a hostile action against the estate. Richard's face turned a deep, unhealthy shade of purple. I am not coercing anyone. I am her father. I am trying to ensure fairness in this family. Chloe has needs. Bailey has a career. It is only right that they share the wealth. Bailey, tell him you want to share. He turned to me, his eyes pleading and threatening all at once. Tell him about the agreement, Bailey. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had forged a notary stamp and tried to bully me over a steak dinner. There is no agreement, I said, and I do not want to share. You selfish little... Richard started to rise from his chair. Sit down, Keaton barked. The authority in his voice was startling coming from such a small man. Linda began to cry. A soft, keening sound. Bailey, please, your sister. She has plans. She has dreams. You cannot just take everything. It is not fair. Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror. But I already paid. The room went quiet. Even Linda stopped crying. Excuse me? Keaton asked, turning his gaze to Chloe. I paid, Chloe repeated, her voice rising in pitch. I paid the deposit on the studio, $5,000, and the first lease payment is due on Monday. I put it on the credit card because Dad said the money would be here today. She turned to Richard, panic setting in. You said it was a done deal. Dad, you said she would sign and the check would clear by Friday. I cannot lose that deposit. It is non-refundable. I watched Richard crumble. His confidence evaporated, replaced by the terrified look of a man whose lies were collapsing under their own weight. He had promised Chloe money he did not have, based on a signature he had failed to extract. Mr. Evans, Keaton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Did you authorize your daughter to incur debts against a trust that does not belong to her? Richard wiped sweat from his forehead. I assumed Bailey would do the right thing. The right thing, I said, opening my manila folder, would have been to ask me, not to rob me. I pulled out the screenshot of Chloe's lease agreement. I slid it down the table toward Keaton. She signed a commercial lease 3 days before the graduation dinner. I said, this was premeditated. They did not want to discuss the inheritance. They wanted to cover their tracks. Keaton glanced at the paper, then looked back at Richard. This confirms it. Keaton said. He closed the binder with a finality that made everyone jump. The assets belong to Bailey. The transfer has already been initiated. The funds are currently sitting in a holding account under her name. Chloe, you will receive nothing. Richard, you have no authority here. Richard stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. We will contest this. I will hire my own lawyer. I will drag this out in probate court for years. You think you can just cut us out? I will freeze those assets so fast your head will spin. Walter was senile when he wrote this. I will prove he was under undue influence. I watched him rant. I watched him threaten. And I felt nothing but a cold, heavy pity. He did not know when to stop. Keaton did not look worried. He did not look angry. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second, thinner envelope. It was sealed with red wax. I was hoping it would not come to this, Keaton said, but Walter prepared for everything, including your predictability. Richard. He placed the envelope on the table. What is that? Linda whispered. This, Keaton said, is a codicil to the will, an appendix, if you like. It contains a specific set of instructions that were to be revealed only in the event that Richard Evans attempted to contest the will or threatened the beneficiary. Richard froze. What instructions? He asked hoarsely. Keaton placed his hand on the envelope. This document does not just confirm Bailey's inheritance, Keaton said. It also pertains to the rest of the estate, the house you live in, Richard, the vacation cottage, the remaining stocks that you manage. Walter placed a trigger clause in his estate plan. Keaton looked directly at my father. If you accept the will as written, you keep the house and your portion of the legacy. But if you fight, if you threaten Bailey, this codicil activates a forensic audit of your management of the family company over the last 10 years, and it grants Bailey the power to freeze your assets pending the investigation. The color drained from Richard's face so completely that he looked like a corpse. An audit? He whispered. Keaton nodded. Walter knew you were creative with numbers. Richard, he was willing to overlook it for the sake of peace, but if you declared war on his granddaughter, he gave me the ammunition to end it. Keaton tapped the wax seal. So, Mr. Evans, do you still want to contest the will? Or should I open this envelope and we can see exactly what Walter knew about your bookkeeping? The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the terrified breathing of my family. They were not looking at me anymore. They were staring at the red wax seal as if it were a bomb. I leaned back in my chair. The power had shifted. The gavel had come down. And for the first time in my life, I was not the one on trial. The silence in the conference room was no longer just the absence of noise. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and making it difficult to breathe. The threat of the forensic audit had sucked the oxygen out of the room, leaving Richard Evans looking like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and was waiting for the ground to rush up and meet him. Theodore Keaton did not give them time to recover. He did not ask if they were ready. He simply reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim, silver laptop. He placed it on the mahogany table, facing us, and opened the lid. There is one final component to the codicil, Keaton said, his voice soft but carrying to the corners of the room. Walter knew that legal documents can be dry. He knew that people can argue with paper. They can claim a signature was forged or a clause was misunderstood. So he decided to leave a message that could not be debated. Keaton pressed a key. The screen flickered to life. A grainy video window opened. The timestamp in the corner read October 14th, 2 weeks before my grandfather passed away. The background was his study, the very room where he had taught me how to read contracts. And then, there he was. Walter Evans sat in his high-backed leather chair. He looked thinner than I remembered, his skin possessing the translucent, papery quality of the dying. A nasal cannula was draped over his ears, feeding him oxygen, but his eyes, those steel-gray eyes that I had inherited, were sharp, lucid, and burning with an intensity that defied his failing body. My mother let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Richard went rigid, staring at the screen as if he were seeing a ghost. Hello? Richard? The Walter on the screen said. His voice was raspy, broken by the rattle of fluid in his lungs, but the authority was unmistakable. If you are watching this, it means you did exactly what I thought you would do. It means you tried to take the money I left for Bailey. Walter paused, taking a labored breath. He leaned closer to the camera lens. I want you to know that I saw everything, he said. I saw the way you looked at her when she came home with straight A's, and you asked why she was not popular like Chloe. I saw the way you made her pay for her own tires while you bought Chloe a convertible. I saw the way you treated her like an employee in her own home. You thought because I was old, I was blind. You thought because I was sitting in my chair in the corner, I was not listening. On the screen? Walter shook his head slowly. I was always listening. Richard, I heard the way you and Linda justified it. You said Bailey was strong. You said she could handle it. You used her resilience as an excuse for your neglect. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and fast. For years, I had told myself I was imagining it. I had told myself I was being sensitive. To hear him say it, to hear the patriarch of our family validate my reality, felt like a physical embrace. Walter shifted in his chair, wincing slightly from pain. I am leaving this money to Bailey not just because I love her, he continued. I am leaving it to her because she is the only one in this family with the integrity to hold it. Chloe. On the screen, Walter's eyes softened, but his words remained hard. Chloe, my dear, you have been failed by your parents. They have taught you that the world owes you a living. It does not. If I gave you this money, it would be gone in a year, and you would be worse off than before. Bailey will protect it. Bailey understands the value of $1 because she is the only one of you who has ever had to actually earn one. The camera focused back on Richard. The digital Walter narrowed his eyes. Now, Richard, about the audit. My father flinched in his chair, actually recoiling from the laptop screen. You are probably telling yourself that you can fight this, Walter rasped. You are probably thinking you can hire a lawyer and claim I was senile. Do not do it. Walter leaned in again, his face filling the frame. I know about the Cayman accounts from 1998. Richard, I know about the shell company you used to funnel the construction kickbacks. I never said anything because I did not want to send my son to prison while I was alive. But if you try to steal from my granddaughter, if you try to take the one thing I have given her to ensure her freedom, I have instructed Keaton to release the files, all of them. Richard was shaking. His hands were gripping the arms of his chair so tightly that the leather creaked. He looked sick. He looked like a man whose entire life was being dismantled frame by frame. I kept the evidence. Richard, Walter said, his voice dropping to a whisper, it is all with Keaton. So, you have a choice. You can walk away and let Bailey live her life, or you can fight, and I will destroy you from the grave. The video crackled. Walter coughed, a deep, wet sound that lasted for several seconds. He took a sip of water from a glass on his desk. When he looked back at the camera, the anger was gone. He looked tired. He looked at the lens as if he could see me sitting there in the future. Bailey, he said. I leaned forward. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I am sorry I did not step in sooner, he said gently. I should have. I was tired, and I was cowardly. I let them treat you like a second-class citizen because I did not want the conflict. That is my greatest regret. He smiled, a weak, fleeting expression. You do not need this money to be great. You are already great. You are the best of us. Bailey, you are the only one who reminds me of your grandmother. Strong, quiet, unbreakable. But take the money anyway. Use it to build a wall they cannot climb over. Use it to be free. He raised a trembling hand to the camera. Goodbye, sweetheart. Do not let them win. The screen went black. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of tension. It was the silence of a crater after the bomb has gone off. I looked at Richard. He was staring at the blank black screen of the laptop, his mouth slightly open, his skin the color of ash. He knew. He knew exactly what files Walter was talking about. The mention of 1998 had shattered whatever resistance he had left. He was not just looking at a lost inheritance, he was looking at potential prison time. Linda was weeping silently, her head bowed. She was not crying for me, or even for Walter. She was crying because the illusion of their perfect, upper-class life had just been exposed as a fraud built on kickbacks and lies. Chloe looked terrified. She looked from Richard to Linda, waiting for them to fix it, waiting for them to tell her it was a joke. But they did not move. For the first time in her life, she was seeing her parents not as gods, but as frightened, compromised people. I sat back in my chair. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was lightness, the heavy coat of shame I had worn for 28 years. The feeling that I was unlovable, that I was the problem, had slipped off my shoulders. Walter had seen me. He had protected me. He had loved me enough to build a weapon and place it in my hand. Keaton closed the laptop with a soft click. He removed his glasses and began to polish them with a handkerchief. "I think the position of the estate is clear," Keaton said. He put his glasses back on and looked at Richard. "We have prepared the transfer documents. The funds have been moved to a secure trust under Bailey's sole control. We also have a document here for you to sign. Richard." Keaton slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "What is it?" Richard whispered. His voice was a wreck. "It is a formal waiver," Keaton said. "It states that you acknowledge the validity of the will and the trust. It states that you forfeit any right to contest the estate now or in the future. And it states that if you or any member of your household attempts to contact Bailey Evans regarding financial matters again, the forensic audit will be triggered immediately." Keaton uncapped a heavy fountain pen and placed it on top of the paper. "Sign it, Richard, and then get out." Richard looked at the paper. He looked at me. There was no anger left in his eyes, only fear. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly that the tip of the pen scratched against the paper before he even started writing. He signed. He pushed the paper back to Keaton. He did not look at me again. He stood up, his movements stiff and geriatric. "Come on, Linda," he muttered. Linda gathered her purse. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Bailey." "Don't," I said. The word was soft, but it stopped her cold. "Just go, Mom." She turned and followed Richard. Chloe was the last to rise. She looked at the empty chair where Richard had been sitting. She looked at the closed laptop. Then she looked at me. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just the confusion of a child who realizes the party is over and the lights have been turned on. She walked out without a word. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind them. I was alone in the room with Keaton. He picked up the waiver Richard had signed and blew on the ink to dry it. He filed it away in his binder. Then he looked at me and offered a small, genuine smile. "He would have been very proud of you today." "Bailey," Keaton said. I looked at the laptop one last time. "Thank you." "Mr. Keaton," I said. "Call me Ted," he replied. "Now, shall we discuss the execution of the trust? You have a lot of paperwork to sign, but this time, I promise you, every page is in your favor." I nodded and picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I was ready to sign, not as a daughter, but as an owner. The heavy glass door had barely latched shut when Theodore Keaton reached for the intercom button on the center of the conference table. His movement was casual, but his eyes held a glimmer of clinical satisfaction. "Security," Keaton said into the speaker. "Please escort the Evans family back to conference room A. They have not completed the exit protocols." I looked at him, confused. I thought it was over. I thought Richard signing that waiver was the end of it. Keaton shook his head, opening the second, thinner file, the one he had called the appendix. "The waiver your father just signed protects him from a criminal referral regarding the forged notary stamp," Keaton explained. "It keeps him out of jail, but it does not address the governance of the remaining assets. You see, Bailey, Walter was a man of contingencies. He knew that if Richard tried to steal from you, it was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a lack of fiduciary fitness." The door opened again. Richard walked in first, looking flushed and irritated, followed by a bewildered Linda and a sullen Chloe. "What is it now?" Richard demanded. not bothering to sit down. "I signed your paper. I am leaving." "Please take your seats," Keaton said. He did not raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Richard scoffed, but he sat. He knew he was on thin ice. Keaton smoothed the document in front of him. In the event that the protective clause regarding Bailey's trust is triggered by an act of coercion, Keaton began, reading from the text, "A secondary protocol is automatically activated regarding the General Evans family estate." Richard's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? The general estate is mine. Walter left that to me to manage." "He did," Keaton agreed, "until you proved yourself to be a liability." Keaton turned the document around so it faced Richard. "This is the appendix of forfeiture. It states that any trustee who attempts to defraud a beneficiary is immediately stripped of all management powers regarding the entire estate portfolio." The room went dead silent. "What does that mean?" Linda asked, her voice trembling. "It means, Mrs. Evans, that as of the moment Richard placed that fake document in front of Bailey at dinner, he ceased to be the executor of the family assets. He no longer controls the investment accounts. He no longer controls the real estate holdings. He no longer has signing authority on the joint accounts." Richard stood up, his face turning a blotchy red. "You cannot do that. That is my money. I built those accounts." "You managed them," Keaton corrected. "And according to the evidence Bailey provided, specifically the forensic accounting note in Walter's file regarding the 1998 shell companies, you managed them with a significant degree of impropriety. This appendix protects the capital from you." Keaton looked at me, then back at Richard. "The management of the general estate is hereby transferred to an independent third-party trustee, effective immediately. Your monthly allowance will be determined by this trustee based on a review of necessary expenses, not lifestyle preferences." Linda let out a sharp cry. "Allowance?" "Richard, what is he saying?" "He is saying we are being put on a budget," Richard spat, staring at Keaton with pure hatred. "It gets worse," Keaton said calmly. He turned his attention to Chloe. Chloe was slouching in her chair, looking back and forth between her parents like a spectator at a tennis match. "And that brings us to the matter of the younger sibling," Keaton said. Chloe straightened up. "Finally, okay, so Dad messed up. But Grandpa Walter wanted me to be okay, right? He wouldn't leave me with nothing." Keaton nodded. "You are correct. Walter did establish a provision for you. He knew that if Bailey received a large sum, you would feel slighted. He also knew that if you were given unrestricted cash, you would likely misallocate it." Keaton pulled a single sheet of paper from the file. "This is the Chloe Evans Educational and Advancement Trust," Keaton announced. Chloe smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. "See? I knew it. How much is in it? Can I access it today? I really need to wire the money for the studio." Keaton held up a hand. "This is not a cash disbursement. Chloe, this is a reimbursement fund." Chloe's smile faltered. "A what?" "It means that the trust will pay for approved expenses directly to the vendor," Keaton explained. "It covers tuition for accredited universities. It covers trade school fees. It covers medical insurance. It does not cover commercial leases for art studios. It does not cover vehicles. And it certainly does not cover cash withdrawals for personal use." Chloe stared at him, blinking rapidly. "But I need the money for the loft. The deposit is already paid. If I do not pay the rest, I lose the $5,000. "Then I suggest you ask your parents for it," Keaton said. "Although, given their new budgetary restrictions, that might be difficult." Chloe turned to Richard. "Dad, you said you would fix this. You said I was getting my share." Richard put his head in his hands. He did not answer. Chloe turned to me. Her face was twisted in a mix of fury and panic. "Bailey, please, you have all that money now. Just give me the $25,000. It is nothing to you. Grandpa wanted me to have help." "Grandpa wanted you to have an education," I said, my voice steady. "He wanted you to learn how to work, not how to spend. The trust is there. Chloe, if you want to go to college, it is free. If you want to learn a trade, It is paid for, but he is not giving you a lifestyle. I am not going to college, Chloe screamed. I am an artist. Then you will have to be a starving one until you sell some work, I said. Linda suddenly slammed her hand on the table. This is cruel. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect mascara. Bailey, how can you sit there and watch this? We are your family. You are stripping your father of his dignity. You are letting your sister fail. You are holding all the cards, and you are just watching. I am not doing anything. Mom, I said, I am just sitting here. You are the ones who built this trap. I pointed to the stack of evidence on the table, the screenshots of the texts, the photo of the fake notary stamp, the lease agreement. You tried to trick me. I said, you tried to steal from me. And because you did that, you triggered the clauses that Grandpa Walter put in place to stop you. I did not write the appendix. Mom. Richard wrote it. He wrote it with every lie he told and every dollar he skimmed over the last 20 years. Keaton nodded in agreement. The evidence provided by Ms. Evans has been authenticated and verified, Keaton said formally. The text messages threatening to cut her off, the video posted by Chloe admitting to the financial pressure, the fraudulent legal document presented at the restaurant. These constitute a pattern of hostile intent. Under the terms of the secret appendix, this invalidates any claim the family has to the presumption of good faith. Richard looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. So I have no control? He whispered. None? I have to ask a stranger for permission to fix the roof on my own house? If the trustee deems the repair necessary, yes, Keaton said. If they deem it cosmetic, no. Linda sobbed openly now. It was a sound of pure despair. She was realizing that her social standing, her luncheons, her shopping trips, everything was about to be scrutinized by a forensic accountant who did not care about her image. Richard, do something, Linda pleaded. There is nothing to do, Richard said, his voice hollow. He knew the law. He knew that the moment Keaton brought up the 1998 accounts, he was checkmated. If he fought the appendix, the audit would go public, and he would go to jail. If he accepted the appendix, he became a child in his own home, living on an allowance. He looked at me. There was no love in his gaze, but there was a newfound fear. You planned this, he said. You knew about this. I shook my head. I did not know about the appendix, but I knew about you, and Grandpa knew about you. I stood up. I picked up my folder containing the evidence. I think we are done here. Mr. Keaton, I said. Keaton stood as well. I believe we are. I will be in touch with the independent trustee to set up your parents' new financial structure. Bailey, if you would follow me to my office, we have your transfer to finalize. I walked toward the door. I had to pass right behind Chloe's chair. I could hear her breathing fast, hyperventilating as the reality of her lost deposit set in. Bailey, Chloe whispered, please. I stopped. I looked down at her. Here is a tip. Chloe, I said, read the contract before you sign the lease. I walked out of the conference room, leaving the three of them sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. The door did not slam this time. It clicked shut with the precision of a bank vault locking down for the night. The atmosphere in the conference room had shifted from a battlefield to a graveyard. The war was over. The casualties had been counted, and now it was simply a matter of burying the bodies. My family sat in stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the mahogany table as if it were a life raft that had suddenly sprung a leak. I remained standing. It gave me a vantage point I had never possessed in the 28 years of my life. From up here, Richard looked small, Linda looked frail, and Chloe looked like exactly what she was, a child who had been promised a toy that was never purchased. Keaton moved to the side of the room, retrieving a final stack of documents from his briefcase. He did not sit down. He stood next to me, a silent sentry reinforcing the new hierarchy. I do not want your love, I said. The words were not shouted. They were not spoken with malice. They were stated as a simple matter of fact, like commenting on the weather. Richard looked up, his eyes bloodshot and weary. Bailey, do not say that. We are your parents. You are my biological predecessors. I corrected him, but parents do not forge signatures from their children. Parents do not hold affection hostage in exchange for a bank transfer. For years, I thought if I just worked harder, if I was just smarter, you would look at me the way you look at Chloe. But I realized something today. I do not want you to look at me like that, because that look is not love. It is ownership, and I am not for sale. Linda let out a sob, reaching for a tissue. You are being so cold. This is not you. This is exactly me, I said. This is the version of me that Grandpa Walter raised. The version you ignored because it was inconvenient. I turned to Keaton. Regarding the Chloe Evans Educational and Advancement Trust, I said. Chloe's head snapped up. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes, desperate and pathetic. I am not dissolving it, I continued. Chloe let out a breath she had been holding. Oh, thank God. Bailey, thank you. I promise I will pay you back for the studio once I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. You are not listening. Chloe, I said I am not dissolving the trust, but I am amending the trusteeship. I looked at Richard. Under the previous arrangement, Richard and Linda were the trustees who approved your expenses. That ends now, since they have been stripped of their management powers over the general estate due to fraud. They are obviously unfit to manage yours. I turned back to Keaton. Mr. Keaton, please draft the amendment. I will be the sole trustee of Chloe's educational fund. Richard slammed his fist weakly onto the armrest of his chair. You cannot do that. You are going to lord this over her? You are going to make her beg her own sister for money? I am going to make her justify her expenses, I said calmly. Something you never did. I looked at Chloe. Here's the deal. This fund exists. It has roughly $200,000 in it. It is for education. It is for professional development. It is for medical emergencies. If you want to go to design school, I will sign the check. If you want to take business classes to learn how to actually run a gallery, I will sign the check. But I will not sign a check for a loft you rented to play artist. Chloe's face crumpled. But the deposit, it is $5,000. If I do not pay the rest by Monday, I lose it. Then you lose it, I said. Chloe stared at me, her mouth open. You lose the $5,000, I repeated, and you learn a lesson that is worth much more than that. You learn that you do not sign a contract for money you do not have. You learn that actions have consequences. That is the first step of your education. Chloe, and I am giving it to you for free. I watched the realization sink in. She was not getting a bailout. She was going to have to call the leasing agent. She was going to have to admit she was broke. She was going to have to face the humiliation she had tried to inflict on me. It is your choice, I said. You can hate me and walk away with nothing, or you can accept that the free ride is over, cancel the lease, and come to me with a real plan for your future, a plan that involves work, not wishes. Chloe did not answer. She slumped back in her chair, tears streaming down her face, but she did not scream. She was in shock. Keaton cleared his throat. We have one final item of business regarding the separation of interests, he said. He slid a single sheet of paper toward Richard. This is a termination of representation, Keaton explained. By signing this, you acknowledge that you have no legal authority to speak for, negotiate for, or represent Bailey Evans in any capacity. It also formally revokes any power of attorney you may have held in the past, including medical proxy. Richard stared at the paper. This is unnecessary. I am her father. It is necessary, I said, because I do not trust you to make a decision about my life if I am unconscious. I do not trust you not to sell my organs if the price is right. That was a low blow, and I saw it land. Richard winced, but he knew I was right. He knew that his credibility was shattered. Sign it, Keaton said, or we open the 1998 file. Richard picked up the pen. His hand was trembling so violently that he had to use his other hand to steady his wrist. He scratched his signature onto the line. It was the signature of a defeated man. Keaton took the paper, checked it, and slid it into his folder. Done, Keaton said. Linda stood up slowly. She looked older than she had when she walked in. Her socialite armor was cracked, her makeup ruined. "Bailey," she said softly, "can I speak to you? Privately? Just for a moment. In the hallway?" I looked at her. I knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted to isolate me. She wanted to use the soft voice, the motherly touch, the guilt. She wanted to whisper that Richard was just stressed, that they loved me, that I should be the bigger person and fix this. She wanted to drag me back into the fog where she could manipulate me. "No," I said. "Bailey, please," she begged. "I just want to explain." "There is nothing to explain. Mom. The video explained it. The forged stamp explained it." I gestured to the room, to the lawyers, to the evidence. "Everything happens here," I said, "on the record, with witnesses. I am done with private conversations where you rewrite history 5 minutes later. If you have something to say to me, say it to Mr. Keaton. He represents me now." Linda looked at Keaton, who stared back with a face like stone. She looked back at me, realizing that the door she had always used to access my empathy had been bricked over. She sat back down, defeated. I turned to the table. I had one last thing to do. I reached into my own bag, not the folder of evidence, but my leather satchel, and pulled out a bound document. It was not thick, perhaps only 10 pages, but I had spent the last 6 months working on it with a mentor from the business school, long before I knew about the inheritance. I placed it on the table in front of Keaton. "What is this?" Keaton asked, surprised. "This is my asset management plan," I said. Richard looked up, confused. "You have a plan?" I ignored him. "Mr. Keaton," I said, "I do not intend to leave this money sitting in a low-yield savings account. I have outlined a strategy for the portfolio. I want 30% allocated to index funds for stability. I want 20% in municipal bonds. I want to liquidate the commercial holdings that Grandpa left in the trust, specifically the warehouse on 4th Street, because the zoning laws are changing next year and the value is going to drop." Keaton's eyebrows shot up. "You know about the zoning changes on 4th? I read the city council minutes. I said, "I also want to set up a charitable foundation for literacy programs, funded by the interest from the bonds, and I want to interview 3 different wealth management firms. I will not be managing this myself, but I will be managing the managers." I tapped the document. "I am not Chloe. I am not going to blow this on a studio or a car. I am going to build something that lasts. I am going to build what Grandpa Walter wanted, a legacy." Keaton picked up the document. He flipped through the pages, scanning my projections, my risk assessments, my notes. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine smile of professional respect. He looked at Richard, who was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. "You told me she was helpless." "Richard," Keaton said, his voice laced with irony, "you told me she needed your guidance. It appears that your daughter is more financially literate than you have been in 20 years. Richard said nothing. He could say nothing. The narrative he had invented, that I was the weak link, the one who needed to be managed, had just been dismantled by a 10-page spreadsheet. Keaton closed my plan and placed his hand on it. "This is excellent work, Bailey," he said. "We can implement the preliminary steps this afternoon." I nodded. Good. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11 o'clock. The meeting had lasted 2 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. "Is there anything else?" I asked. Keaton shook his head. "No, the waivers are signed. The trust is secured. The restrictions on your parents are active. The appendix is in effect. You are free to go." I gathered my things. I put the evidence folder back in my bag. I stood up and smoothed my blazer. I looked at my family one last time. Richard was staring at his hands, stripped of his power, his reputation hanging by a thread held by his daughter. Linda was staring at the wall, mourning the loss of her lifestyle. Chloe was staring at her phone, likely reading the email from the leasing office, facing the first real problem of her life. I did not feel happy. I did not feel joyful, but I felt light, the crushing weight of their expectations, their judgment, their conditional love. It was all gone. I walked to the door. Goodbye, I said. I did not wait for a response. I stepped out of the conference room and into the hallway. The air out here was cooler, cleaner. I walked toward the elevators, my heels clicking on the floor with a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. Strong, steady, mine. I pressed the button for the lobby. I did not look back at the heavy wooden door. There was nothing behind it that I needed anymore. I stood before the elevator buttons, the metal cool against my fingertips. I pressed the down arrow and watched the digital display above the doors illuminate. 40, 39, 38. The hallway was quiet, but it was a fragile silence. I could hear the heavy oak door of the conference room creak open behind me. I did not turn around. I knew who it was. I could feel the desperate energy radiating from them like heat from a pavement in summer. "Bailey, wait." It was Richard. His voice echoed against the marble walls, stripped of its usual command, replaced by a frantic, ragged edge. I kept my eyes on the elevator numbers. 35, 34. He grabbed my shoulder. His grip was tight, bordering on painful. "You cannot just walk away like this," he panted. He was out of breath from walking 10 yards. "We need to talk about the logistics. If you cut off the accounts, how are we supposed to pay the mortgage next month? How do we pay the club fees? You are reacting out of anger. You need to be reasonable." I spun around, shaking his hand off my shoulder with a sharp, violent motion. "I am not reacting. Richard," I said, my voice echoing in the corridor, "I am executing." Before he could grab me again, the conference room door opened fully. Theodore Keaton stepped out. He was holding one final document, a blue-backed court filing that looked fresh and crisp. "Mr. Evans," Keaton boomed. His voice was no longer conversational. It was the voice of a man who commanded courtrooms. "Step away from my client." Richard froze. "I am her father. I am trying to talk sense into her." "You are harassing a protected beneficiary," Keaton said, walking toward us with purposeful strides. "And you are doing so immediately after signing a waiver acknowledging your loss of status." Keaton thrust the blue document into Richard's chest. Richard instinctively grabbed it. "What is this?" Richard asked. "That," Keaton said, "is a temporary restraining order and a cease and desist mandate regarding financial harassment. It was prepared in anticipation of this exact moment. It prohibits you, Linda Evans, and Chloe Evans from contacting Bailey Evans regarding any financial requests, demands, or guilt-based solicitations." Richard looked at the paper, his hands shaking. "You got a restraining order? Against your own family?" I looked him in the eye. "It is not against my family," I said. "It is against my debtors." Linda and Chloe had stepped into the hallway now. Linda looked at the paper in Richard's hand, and then at me. Her face crumpled into a mask of tragic martyrdom. "Bailey, how can you be so cruel?" she wailed. "We raised you. We fed you. We drove you to soccer practice. And now you treat us like criminals? You are destroying this family over money." I took a step toward her. She flinched, but I did not stop until I was standing right in front of her. "I am not destroying the family, Mom." I said, "I am professionalizing it. You spent 20 years treating our relationship like a transaction. You invested in Chloe because you thought she would yield a higher social return. You ignored me because you thought I was a low-yield asset. Well, the market has corrected itself." I pointed to the elevator. "The assets, my assets, are gone." I said, "As of 10 minutes ago, Keaton transferred the entirety of the trust into a blind management system. I do not even have the password to move the money myself. It is locked in a diversified portfolio managed by a firm in Chicago. If you ask me for $1, I literally cannot give it to you. The bank is closed." Linda stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. The realization hit her hard. It was not just that I wouldn't give her money. It was that the mechanism to even ask had been dismantled. Chloe stepped forward. She looked small, her designer jacket looking like a costume on a frightened child. "But what about me?" she whispered. "You said Dad was using me." I looked at my sister. For the first time, I felt a twinge of pity. She was 24, but she had the emotional maturity of a teenager because Richard and Linda had never allowed her to grow up. Think about it. Chloe, I said, why did they push so hard for me to sign that paper at the restaurant? Why did Dad encourage you to lease a studio you could not afford? Chloe frowned. Because he believes in my art. No, I said bluntly, because he needed a vehicle to move cash. I turned to Richard. Tell her. Richard, tell her why you needed the money in her account and not yours. Richard looked away, his jaw clenched. He will not tell you. So I will. I said to Chloe, if the money went to you, he could guilt you into lending it to him to cover his gambling debts and the bad investments in the 1998 shell companies. He knew he could not manipulate me, but he knew he could manipulate you. You were not the golden child. Chloe, you were the funnel. Chloe turned slowly to look at Richard. Dad, is that true? Richard did not answer. He stared at the floor, defeated by the truth. Chloe let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She stepped back from him, looking at him with revulsion. I thought I was the favorite. You were just the easiest to control, I said. I turned back to Richard. And one last thing, I said. The document at the restaurant, the one with the fake notary stamp. Richard looked up. It was void before I even saw it. I said, not just because of the stamp, but because it was ultra-virus. It was beyond your authority. You tried to assign rights to a trust that you never held title to. Even if I had signed it, any competent judge would have thrown it out in 5 minutes. You were so arrogant you thought you could rewrite property law with a Mont Blanc pen. I shook my head. You are not a businessman. Richard, you are a con artist who ran out of marks. The elevator chimed behind me. The doors slid open. Linda lunged forward, grabbing my hand. Her touch was clammy. Bailey, please, she sobbed. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Do not leave us like this. We love you. I looked down at her hand on mine. It felt heavy. It felt like a chain. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my skin. You do not love me, I said. You love the safety net I provided, and I am cutting the net. I stepped into the elevator. I turned around to face them. Keaton stood in the hallway, blocking them from following me. He gave me a sharp nod of respect. Richard stood slumped against the wall, a man whose empire of lies had evaporated. Linda was weeping into her hands. Chloe was standing apart from them, looking at her parents as if she were seeing strangers. Bailey, Linda cried out one last time. Just give us a chance. We respect you now. We respect your power. I reached for the button marked Lobby. I looked at them as the doors began to slide shut. Respect does not need permission, I said, and it certainly does not need a price tag. The doors closed. The last thing I saw was the image of my family, smaller and smaller, trapped in a hallway of their own making, while I descended toward the street, toward my car, and toward a life that finally, truly belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing justice served as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from the US, the UK, Vietnam, or somewhere else entirely? Let me know in the comments below. I always love reading about where our community is growing. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get discovered by more people who need a little bit of righteous justice in their day. See you in the next story.